Here. Thank you, Anya, for the introduction, CENTRO for hosting, Pepon for doing this program. It's a tremendous honor, like I think a huge personal honor for me. Everything Anya said is true, that Pepon has been a friend, a dear friend and mentor for many years, but also someone whose practice I admire tremendously. And we talk about art and community. And so that was my first class yesterday before coming here. And looking at a lot of this work from years past to now. And I wanted just to see a show of hands really quickly before we start. Like, how many people have not yet seen the show at the new museum? Okay, great.
So I also have a suggestion.
Yeah.
And this like I always tell my students, like teach at Fire School of Art, and always tell my students, when you see the door it says do not enter, go right through that door. That's the one that's going to get you to the plate. So also, if you're not a Lower Side and you're interested in and you're interested to seeing the show, just go at the door and tell them that want to just show up. And I'll be there. I'll be there any day. So yeah, of course, I remember you. But do come if you're interested in the show. I'm not kidding. It's the only way you're gonna be able to get it.
That's literally perfect. And it's also appropriate that today, we're not in the auditorium today because of some HVAC issues, so we're in a slightly less hot space here, which is kind of a perfect space actually, because it's less formal, but it's also in terms of entering where the exit is. We'll say these on the other side of this wall, literally with a big word exit, right, on the front, so it couldn't be more appropriate in that regard. And Jose is also a friend of the so it's great.
So Miguel, mentorship works both ways. And you have I'm serious. And you can and I'm surrounded to the new generation of people and what's happening around. So it works both ways.
Thank you.
I guess my news and my inspiration from conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really honored to do it. I'm grateful to have had an artist like you in my life, but also an artist who has modeled a practice that has been different from all of the other artists that I think about, honestly. And many artists that I admire, but your practice is very distinct in that it is not a traditional art practice. It's not a traditional art trajectory. And all of those things I think have been inspiring to think about other ways of having an artistic practice that can connect with communities outside of traditional art spaces, outside of museums, and think about ways of connecting with community first. So I'm jumping forward a little bit into stuff, but
may I
please.
I just wanted to also say that I wanted to give thanks to El Centro, and I'll make reference to it at some point, but a lot of what you see in the work, especially the scene of a crime and a couple of earlier works and performances with Marian Soto and Patty Bradshaw, a lot of the cargo material came from El Centro, and very, very few people know that. And so when I was invited to do this, it's like, hell yeah, I'm gonna do it, because there's a direct connection with the work that Blanca, who's here somewhere back there, and Nelly here. I would go every day and to El Centro and spend time, and I asked them about the archival material, and they're very, 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 very protective of it. And I didn't know. And so we were always arguing, fighting, and I'm always trying to find a way to include them in the work. And they were like, no, but you can't take them home. It's like, what? So that's when I didn't know anything about it. But anyway, I just wanted to say that because, both Nelida, El Centro, and Blanca Vasquez have been integral to the access of our history in many ways.
Yeah, and for multiple generations, because Nelida is also the person that I remember being the point person giving access to the archive when I got to build a relationship with CENTRO when I moved to New York a generation later. And so that story is very familiar to me and many, many other researchers for many generations, and I could not be more grateful to Nelida. Honestly, it's like it's the people that we meet and the work that we do that we build relationships with institutions through. And oftentimes I feel like we're so alienated from institutions and so intimidated by institutions that we don't have those relationships, that, key people can make all the difference, you know, in how we relate to a space. I always tell a story with Museo del Barrio, that it was Annie, who worked in the gift shop, that was the face of the museum. And if it was not for her kindness and openness, it's like my relationship with the museum would have been really different. And so, and I think institutions take that for granted, but CENTRO was very lucky to have many. So, yes. So we wanted to try something different. This is Pepon said, so I'm gonna ask. No, it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
I had another idea that we keep rotating the images, and rather than doing a traditional thing where you just show the thing and turn around, you go, you know, very academic. We just want to roll them, and this might be inspiring for the people who haven't seen the show. Maybe not, but that was the other thing. But go.
Yeah, and we'll touch on the work in the exhibition for sure.
Right.
But I think that the spirit of this as an opportunity to have a conversation, and to be in conversation with Pepon, and to be here in a barrio, and also to think about a barrio as a context. These follow. I want to get into that a little bit also, in your history here in the community, where CENTRO is now, but CENTRO was not here, you know, before. And so there are several things I want to think about in the space that we're in. But we also wanted to give everyone in the room an opportunity to be part of this from the onset. And so, Pepon, you want to offer the prompt?
Sure. Okay. I thought that it might be a good idea to hear from. Oh, that's right. I thought it would be a good idea to hear from us here. One word that you have that you are either expecting or that you want to hear Miguel and I talk about, and that word or those words will create a framework for the conversation. I think sometimes we just get into this conversation, and I do it all the time, and I just like, oh my God, here we go. I didn't hear what I wanted to hear. So somehow, somewhere, I want people spontaneously to say the word out loud, and but it's only one word, and you only get one chance. Don't get up twice, only one. And Miguel, who has a better hearing, will take notes. And I'm sorry, I'm the kind of guy that saves the best jokes for the wait. I'm like that kind of person. So
That's great. That's great. So should we pass the mic on and do it that way, and I'll take notes?
oh, I can pass the mic, or you can speak up. I don't know about the people that are online, but whenever you're ready and you get the spirit, you know, like get up and say it. And Miguel will.
Let's pass the mic around, so.
Okay, you want me to pass
I
it?
can do it.
Okay. It shouldn't take that long. And the longer you take, the longer we'll stay here. Yeah.
Everybody?
No, whoever's ready.
To anybody who wants, yes.
Yep.
Here,
No pressure.
you can pass it next, but.
Gathering. Okay,
Voyage.
wow.
Have it
Okay.
over here.
Masculinity.
There you go.
Love.
Vacilón.
Storytelling.
No, sorry.
So from Zoom, we have vulnerability.
Those of you,
We have vulnerability, sovereignty, and religion from Zoom. Fascism too, the spot.
Access.
collaboration.
Welcome. Joy.
Conservation.
What Apache?
Out of there. Do we feel that we have enough?
Cultural power.
Say it again? No.
Cultural power.
Cultural power.
Working class.
That's 2 words for oral history. I'm kind of interested in oral history.
All this, we're just gonna combine the word into one. Follow the truth.
So, more from Zoom, modernism, desire, and movement.
If you choose one, which one of those words?
No, so it's 3 different people
Oh,
saying
no,
modern, no, so every time I'm going, yeah, these are all different people saying they're one word, modernism, desire, and movement.
Thank you.
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
Memoria. Memory.
Memoria.
Sound.
Yeah.
Answer. Access.
City.
City. Anyone who has a burning urgency to say a word or the mouth, we're just gonna go. There you go. One. That's.
Process.
Process.
Okay, so,
One way or another, we'll figure this out and we'll come to it at the end.
I'm just gonna read this back, that's the list,
Yeah.
okay? And then if you don't hear a word, you can repeat it, because I might have got it, but I think I only left a couple out. In no particular order here, gathering, voyage, masculinity, love, vacilón, storytelling, transcending, vulnerability, sovereignty, religion, access, exagerado, conservation, willpower, Fort Apache, sovereignty, cultural power, working class, oral history, modernism, desire, movement, knowledge, memoria, sound, ancestor, access, city, process. Collaboration.
So,
We haven't made a poem.
so we'll try to cover all that. In the conversation, I don't know, if you wanted to do this question and answer or the back.
This is a brilliant idea. This is a great idea, but I'm gonna put these here so you can see them.
Okay.
And,
I'm not, I have to disclose, I'm not a linear thinker. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like going on a Coney Island roller coaster, but we all get there. You know, it's I'm up and down, around everywhere, and then somehow, somewhere, I get to the point.
Yeah.
So never expect me to be like so linear and so clean, because that's not the way that I feel comfortable at talking. And if I want to open up to all these words, I just have to be myself.
beautiful. And what a great place to be yourself. So that was actually the thing that was most exciting about doing this talk in this context, is that some of the informality of it, and also being in your own community to do this, being among family and friends, of which there are many here, actually makes this a lot more fun. And it makes, I think, us be comfortable being more of our fullest selves, right? So back to the idea of institutions, right? And how you sort of penetrate these spaces and make them our own, right? And build them with our own energy. I think, this place is a working process, where we are in terms of CENTRO in this particular edifice, right? So, and we are the energy that builds the energy of this space. So that said, your nonlinear thinking, I think, is part of what makes your storytelling so good. And so, and I've seen you do artist talks, like traditional artist talks, where it's like, a couple of images and speaking about them. But I've also seen you do a talk with like maybe 2 or 3 images and have the whole room with you for an hour, which I cannot say about very many people at all. And so that, and part of it, I think, is about how you're a great storyteller. And so that's one of the words here. And I wonder if we can think about that, like in what it's part of all of your work, right? But I'm curious about your history as a storyteller, or thinking of yourself, if you've ever thought about yourself that way when you were younger to now. Yeah. And what did it look like when you were younger?
I don't know what it looked like because I was too young. But I remember so my mother was a nurse, and my father worked on night shifts, and there's this tradition in Puerto Rico, and I don't know, I also speak from a generation way, way back. But there was a tradition in Puerto Rico of people who will come from other towns and migrations of people from other towns into the urban area where we live. And this person, Juana, for whom La Cama is dedicated, Juana was my caregiver, but not a caregiver in the upper upper and wealthy family. We really were working class. Caregiver to someone who just came in and said, if you give me room and board, we'll work something out. And this happened a lot in Puerto Rico at that time. And so Juana became what I call the caregiver, for lack of a better word, but Juana was a storyteller. And Juana would tell me stories about the entire town where she grew up. I don't know if you saw the exhibit, those of you who saw, maybe you didn't see it, but there is a piece next to convalescence, which is a glass of water at the very, 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 very top of the museum. That comes from Juana. That was a story about spirituality. And Juana was a very, very spiritual person. And she said, if in life, anything goes wrong with you, just fill a glass of water, put it at the highest point of any room, and it will clear the entire space. And so what I'm doing is just basically honoring stories that are all over the place above us, and somehow, somewhere, some of those stories come to me, and then I'm able to translate them with art, in an installation work of art. Complicated stories. I don't present my point of view. I usually translate the metaphors of what other people's stories. Yeah.
So that's the purification, right? Is this? I didn't see it actually till like the third time I was at the show.
No.
And so and if you're at the show, when you're at the show, it's in the first area that you enter into, but you might not see it if you go to the right when you enter. It will be the last thing that you see. In fact, if you enter clockwise through the show, and that's part of why I didn't see it until I saw the corner. And part of this, the reason I saw it above the corner was because there were also bars, right?
Yep.
Like a jail, right? Like bars outside the classroom. There are bars that on the walls of where
The entrance.
the reform, yeah.
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 That's
Right. So, and it's just above those in the corner. So you'll see it when you go to the exhibition. But maybe that's a good segue into where the show begins and how the show begins. When we enter into the space of the show, we enter into convalescence, right?
We enter into convalescence, and you'll see it very soon. Convalescence is a story of so there's two things. One of them related to the glass of water is that I have issues with institutions, but I also have issues with the format and the model of exhibit work. And I have always figured a way, and this is not the first one, many, many times, always figure a way to put work in the context that it's not necessarily exhibit A in front of the wall and in front of you. Because I always think that the exhibition is actually almost like making a cake. And so there's a lot of work that is hidden that people don't see it, but it exists, and it takes a while. And I don't put pressure on people because I think that it's important also to bump into it by mistake or by pure coincidence. I wanted it. Let me go back a little bit, and I'll be very quick. This is not a retrospective, and everybody thinks of it as a survey and work. It is not. It will take more than one room to do that. Maybe more than one museum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hopefully I'll be alive when that happens. But I was also thinking of a rubber band for this exhibition, and I was always thinking of the community as a rubber band, this thing that expands and contracts at the same time. And I began by telling my own story. it had gotten to the point that I feel that I'm telling other people's stories, and I never had a chance to tell my story. So I'm implicated in this exhibition. I'm implicated in all the work, but I think somehow at the very beginning. I also took in consideration, and the curators kept saying, there's 2 or 3 ways in which people come in. And I said, the majority of people that I know, who are my friends who are gonna come and see the show, they're gonna take the elevator. They're not gonna get the stairs. So, it is true. I know my friends that take the elevator. So, you open up into the elevator and you walk into convalescence. I'm just waiting for it to come in. But convalescence, it's my story. My story in relationship to health, into healing, into lots of other things. And my relationship with the Health and Hospital Corporation. I had the unfortunate circumstance of having to depend from the Health and Hospital Corporation. And I totally freaked out and I stopped for about 3 years. I didn't make any work. But I have this thing, and I'm talking about this, the stories coming to me. I have these things that I sat there for treatment, and everyone who was around came and talked to me. And so I just sat there and I'm listening to people's stories. And the more that I listen to people's stories, tell me when
It's coming, it's coming.
the more that I heard people's stories, the more I realized that I was also in people's stories, but I somehow was fortunate because I was receiving the treatment in a really that's me as a narrator of the piece. And I'll talk about this later. And I guess the next one is the part.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Look at the bottles, and I'll tell you later about the whole. I'll be quick. And so I woke up one day and I said, I have to do something about this. I have to do something about the stories. And so I began to do the stories by going to Puerto Rico. Everybody was telling me that Puerto Rico is so difficult to make art and it's almost impossible. And actually, it's really true. It's very, very difficult. But then I decided to make a work of art in Puerto Rico. This all came about with this guy, whose name is Ramon. And Ramon, I was standing there, he sells hamburger, pinchos, and all kinds of things in Bayamon. And I am talking to him, and we're having a conversation, and then he begins to tell his stories.
Ramon.
And Ramon started to tell the story, which is similar to the experience that I was going through. And so Ramon at the end says, well, I'm gonna retire, and I'm just gonna, give away this card. I don't know, but I really have to retire. And then I turn around, and I don't know why. Most of my work is by intuition. And I said, Ramon, give me the card. Give me the card. And then he said, you want the card? I said, yeah, I'll take the card. I had no clue what I was doing. I mean, this is like a huge card. And I was trying to get to the garage, which I call it my studio, but really it's a garage. And then I took the card. Obviously, I bought it from him. And I took the card and then started to have a conversation with Ramon. Ramon knows all the people not all the people, but the majority of the people that I work with, they know where I am. And they know in the process, they have my number, my telephone number, they know how to contact me and all this. So Ramon and I began into this conversation and eventually translated into this. And there's very specific things here. The bottles, the medicine bottles, they're repeated again. This, with the figurines, most of them black, talks about the absence of the black medical professions. People of African descent in the medical profession, sorry, at an upper level. And then it goes really by little, explaining stories about the center of it. You see bottles, and in the bottles, they're in the map of the archipelago, Puerto Rico, and Isla de Mona, Vieques, and Culebra, because the great Vieques right now Culebra does not have any kind of medical
Facility.
Thank you, facility.
Yeah.
And then all my work starts with a narrator. And I'll show you little by little the rest of the narrator, but the guy was standing like this with all the Band-Aids,
Yeah.
thank you. Oh, this is the perfect thing for senior citizens. You guys are so helpful.
It's, the figure is literally covered, the skin of the entire figure is made of bandits.
Right, and that is the story that when I was a little kid, I always had to wear somebody else's skin colored Band-Aid. And it wasn't until I was probably 20 years old that I put the first Band-Aid that looked like me. And so I covered myself. I asked this guy, he got really interested. I always have to convince the people that I'm an artist. And this guy got really interested in participating in the piece. And I said, usually I do videos. And I said, well, what kind of videos are gonna do? It's like, you'll be perfect. Don't worry, you'll be perfect, Ramon. So Ramon came over. I had another friend who happens to be a nurse. And then I asked him if it was okay to draw blood from him, which is basically what I did for about 6 months. Got my blood work done. And the piece is covered with garlic. Pieces of garlic, but they're not real garlic.
Yeah, they're like bulbs of garlic, they look very real now.
Yeah, but they're not. Bulbs of garlic, and then there is a lot of sequence, which happens, I don't know, someone talks about abundance or work. There was a lot of sequence, and there's a lot of reflection in the work. This happened during COVID time, so of course, the whole place was covered with plastic, but the sequence has a reference. And the reference is that I was also in conversations with someone, and that person said to me, I use a lot of sequence because when the bad spirits come, they get confused with the reflection of the light, and then they go away. I thought, oh, that's perfect. I'm gonna put that in my work. And so these conversations and the stories that come usually are translated in the work. The chair, perfect, covered in plastic. The chair was when the nurses came to my house for treatment, that's the chair that I sat. And one day I sat on that chair and I thought, oh, this is the convalescence. Actually, it looks like something like this, the design. And I thought, oh, I'll do that. So you see me standing as opposed to laying down or crawling. I'm standing. And then the two sticks that are coming down are called, I forgot the name, but they're healing sticks. And so I'm standing in power and I'm standing owning my own. And also the images on the
Tapiceria,
tapestry.
the tapestry, the fabric,
upholstery.
the upholstery.
The upholstery. The image of the
Game show.
upholstery are from the fair. I traveled to Brazil one, and this lady came over and she gave me this beautiful printed fabric from the best school, and I just added that because I also was going to stand on top of my ancestors. So the piece is very complicated. There's like tongues sticking out everywhere, and that has to do when you go to the doctor, they put the tongue, whole vernacular, my visual vocabulary, it's not of a 30-year-old artist, And so I honored a lot of these images, and I honor a lot of these visualizations that happen in the work as a way to also honor the process and the time and the effort that I lived in New York City, which is extremely important, and that's not documented. So it goes into museums also to look at that. But it really takes a completely different perspective if you're not from the Puerto Rican culture. And I have to say Puerto Rican culture because I don't want to assume that someone from, let's say, Ecuador will get it the same way that Puerto Ricans did. Because of the entry.
Yes. So it brings, I have so many things that it makes me think about, but I mean, the first thing that it makes me think about as you describe it is that, and I love this about your work, is that it prioritizes in many ways an audience, and a very specific Puerto Rican audience oftentimes, as a viewer that understands the codes, that understands the meaning of everything that's embedded in these objects and symbols, right? That you can turn an empty bottle into a bottle of alcohol, and that there's medicine and healing implied in so many of these gestures and objects throughout the work. And so we become the audience of privilege
Mhm.
in that regard, you know what I mean? Who can translate those things, and I've always loved that, and I think that that in itself is a political act in art making, that you make things that are coded in a language that other people can access, but they will have to maybe do some work to access it. And it's not spelled out in the labels and doesn't need to be either, right? It's, I think it's intentional, probably, that everything is not spelled out. But that's part of what makes it feel like it's ours. You know what I mean? And that's part of the emotional impact of the work, is in seeing ourselves reflected and our culture, our history, our traditions in so much of the work that's there, in a space where we never get them, right? Which are museums. So, and that's the gift of so much of this, and so much of this.
Right. I have to tell you a story which I have said many times, but I don't think I've said it to enough. I had after the Museo del Barrio retrospective, I had the opportunity to present work at the Whitney Museum in 1993. And that was the very, very beginning that I felt that it opened up greater opportunities in mainstream. There is a whole story of why I didn't show and I was not interested in mainstream before it, and that's like a completely different thing. My relationship to exhibition formats and all that. And so then when that happened, back to that retrospective at the Museo del Barrio, I was invited to the Whitney Biennial, which I accepted, and it was perfectly. I presented the work, and in the New York Times, you might think that I am that kind of an artist, but I'm not. I don't solicit anything. Like, things come to me. In fact, the exhibition at the new museum, I had seen Faith Brendel exhibition there, a retrospective, and I was so moved. And I walked out, and I said to myself, "I'll never have a show here." You know, seriously, I'm not kidding. 2 weeks later, I get the invitation.
Wow.
And so things come to me similar to stories. But anyway, all that to say is that it came out in the New York Times, and it was half a page in the Sunday New York Times. And I'm really, really excited because people got to see the work, you know, in big production. So I come in, I go to a next door neighbor who worked with me very closely in the Bronx. And I said, "Luisa, look, we're in the New York Times, look." And Luisa looked at me and looked at the New York Times. She was at the door frame, which is like my favorite place in New York City, door frame. It's like you're not in, but you're not out.
You're right, yeah, you're at the pressure.
And you're like, you're seeing inside, but you also know where you're coming from, and you know, there's a beautiful tension there. And so Luisa looked at me, and she kept looking and looking at the New York Times at the phone. What the hell is the New York Times?
Nice.
And I'm standing there and I'm going like, oh, okay. So Luisa and I have been working on this all along. I get to celebrate. She doesn't know, and she doesn't get to celebrate. And then from then on, it turned out completely that from that moment on, I had to present the work in the context of the museum, of the community. And that's when I started looking for storefronts and vacant spaces in the community. The community has to see it first.
Yep.
Then it can be built or it can be seen at the museum. The beautiful thing of all this is that the museum, most of them that have worked with me, now understand the difficulties of going to the community to see them. And so that's like kind of a back and forth conversation that often happens.
Sure. And that was with this
I don't
work.
even know why I'm saying this.
No, it's perfect. I mean, this is the work that was made, that was in the 93 biennial, was Scene of the Crime.
Right.
Crime.
And in this work, which coincidentally was quite amazing. In this work, we was here in the east side. I worked with the detectives, and I sat in the back of the car and I started asking questions, and they took me around and something. Again, I got to see a lot of crime scenes because what I wanted to see is how Hollywood looked at people of color, specifically the Puerto Ricans, how we were portrayed, but also how we saw ourselves. And so there was this, and you'll get to see it. With evidence back, at the end, I was very upset and really, really pissed off at the museums. And at the end of this exhibition, I'm putting the exhibition together, I called the detectives and I told them, come to the museum. You need to come to the Whitney Museum. Of course, they didn't have to park, they came in and I saw them from the window, they put the sticker in front and they walked in and people in the museum were, what's going on? And so they went upstairs. David Ross, who was the director then and the curator for the exhibitions, they come down and I have them next to me and we're looking at this thing. And in looking at it, I realized that what I was doing was really working with non-art professionals who finally put the seal of approval in the work. And so there was this kind of conceptual idea that I really wanted them to watch what's going on, but really the person that had authority over this work right there in the moment, he was investigating the whole thing, was both of them. So they actually put they did the fingerprints, they did all the plastic, the yellow things. This happened in 1993, and that was the first World Trade Center attempt.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Exactly the same day. And so
Wow.
they made an effort and came over, and then they put all the evidence back. I have been in touch with them, and to my pleasure, I have to tell you, they came to the new museum and there's a piece of it. Exactly the same guy.
And they reinstalled it with you the same
They
way.
did.
Wow.
They did. Both of us 30 pounds extra.
That's amazing.
But it was really an amazing experience. And so, it's everything. This exhibition is also about closing the circle of many things.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that you touched on here that are for me significant. One is that this is a important moment in your work and practice when you decide that the community is going to be the priority, right? That the work will first be placed in communities and then in an institution when relevant or necessary, right? But there's a shift in your practice, right? And what's interesting, I just want to give mention to this something you said before that is that this other show that happened in the 80s at Museo del Barrio, right? In the early 90s, but based on work that was produced in the 80s primarily, right? So that's this catalog, which is hard to find now, but is around. And I want to recognize Susana Torreira, who's with us. Yeah, she's here. Yeah. We curated this show in 91. Yeah. So this is, I read this whole catalog before today. And it's before my time to show. I never got to see it. In 91, I was just finishing high school, in Miami. So I come to know your work a decade later, pretty much, but I was so fascinated with the essays and with the conversation on work, so many of which are so similar today, 30 years later. But I also was really moved by knowing that so much of this work was produced in and around El Barrio, that El Barrio was part of the energy of this work, right?
And the South Bronx.
And the South Bronx, of course, yeah. And that the 93 biennial that gets a lot of attention in your career, right? And rightfully so, as a major kind of exposure. That this show gets less attention, but was incredibly important in your trajectory.
It got a lot of local attention.
Okay.
And it was so I'll explain very, very quickly what happened. I went to the Museum of Modern Arts to see a survey exhibition in 80 something. I don't know what it was, 85, it must have been 85. And there was a survey, and I walked in and I saw an exhibition. It's still debated because I'm talking to the curators at the museum and we're trying to figure out who the hell was the artist. And I saw an artist that talked about a Puerto Rican family in a very derogative way. And I was so mad. I remember actually writing a letter to Juan Sanchez, Susana, about my experience in seeing this and how upset I was with what I saw. And I decided that for the next 5 years, I was not going to step in a museum. I was not going to step, I'm very stubborn. I was not going to step in a museum. I didn't want to see any work. I didn't want to do anything. And all the time I spent it in the South Bronx at PS 39. Yeah, both. And I spent a lot of it time, by the way, my biggest inspiration was the tire, man shop at the top by John. Every day I come in and come out, I see that work and was a great inspiration. Thank you, thank you. And so, I did that, and I worked with Marianne and my wife, Marianne Soto, and that was the very beginning, and Patty Bradshaw, who's here. That was the very beginning of experimenting the stuff that I was doing in performance and in dance, but not in the visual art. I went into the decade show, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with this exhibition, it was a major exhibition here in New York City, the decade show as a performer, not as a visual artist. I was not known at all, at all. Fast forward 5 years later, I entered the Museo del Barrio as an artist in residence. I spent 3 years. And luckily enough, Susana Pedroya Levar offered the retrospective when we went back and forth about what a retrospective was, but also my relationship to institutions. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or not. We both agreed, we had a long conversation, we both agreed that we did it. And in fact, it happened, and it happened it happened in big terms. I was also responding at that same time to the fact that I knew, and this is something very painful for many artists of the generation earlier, the 80s, that we were given opportunities as an art community. We were given opportunity to small spaces in November. And really tiny opportunities in November because it was the Hispanic and the Hispanic month. So stubborn that I am, I began to work big and unmanageable. I'm not kidding. It's a strategy. It's a strategy. That somehow I think it paid off. And so the exhibition actually is the stack, and it's a lot of the retelling of stories of performances and a lot of elements that were used in performance, with the exception of a new piece that it was commissioned called El Velorio, AIDS in the Latino community. And so that piece was recent, and I worked with non-professionals from Body Positive. And I think this was a wonderful opportunity to tell the story on our own terms, not necessarily looking at a museum, looking at mainstream and not wanting to be them, which is one of the biggest cases that I have, because I think at a time, it was the very, very beginning that we understood that we have something really strong to offer to our communities in our own terms and in our context, and not necessarily following the model of the white box that existed at that time. Things have changed, and I know everything has to change. This world is just like a pendulum, comes and go. And I think that this was a wonderful opportunity. I had to correct a couple of curators after that because they thought that they discovered me, and I said no. That did not happen. I know who discovered me. I know where I was, and that's not true. And so, yeah, but it is the model of wanting to claim and wanting to the old model of wanting to claim artists and I to claim moments then that I'm sure everybody here, not everybody, but many of you in the audience know what I'm talking about.
No, it's great. I mean, some of this it has not changed a lot in the art world, so it makes me think about I mean, on our own terms, being in a space where we can make work on our own terms, exhibit work on our own terms, have it actually discussed, presented, articulated, unpacked on our own terms is a very rare opportunity when working with institutions. It's the exception, definitely the exception, not the norm. And so, yeah.
But I don't show much. I think that I honestly. Speaking to the microphone. Okay, thank you. I don't show work, and I wanted to believe that I'm a celebrated artist with the least exhibition record. And it's true in those terms. Wow. Actually, I haven't even done my resume since 2017. I'm not kidding. Because because I feel that when things are ready, I'll move on and I'll do them. The new museum, and I told the curators, by the way, of wonderful people. Margot Norton and Bernardo Mosqueda, they're really wonderful people. I said, you know, I'm doing this, and I remember vividly that I'm doing ontología, and Susana, correct me if I'm wrong. I did a ontología because it was a time capsule. And I really wanted this to be a time capsule. That someone looked at it 5 years ago, and then this happened and all this work. And the new museum, I did it because I felt that it was really, really important to finally show the work all under one roof. And for students who are going to college, who are working in the vacuum. And in their own terms as Latinx students, and they're working in the vacuum, and they're not understood by the faculty. Right. And I thought, what a good opportunity to show this thing, and then finally, you know, put it out there so then they can come and see it. And I had the most wonderful time this week with students from NYU, City University. They come in and they just sobbed. They cried and cried because they needed that, and I needed it too, you know. And so there's this beautiful connection, and the only way that I exhibit is outside of the museums, and in museums, I exhibit only when I think it's the right time, but I'm not a commercial artist. I don't make money out of this thing. But I only exhibit because there's a justification and a good reason to make it happen, you know. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that I'm so moved by hearing it. We talked previously, and we talked about this point in particular about why you did the show, you know, and I remember you talking about young artists, right? So young artists and students can see themselves reflected in spaces like this. That is still necessary, right? And it's still so powerful for us to have that experience. Incredibly powerful. And it's also the same in academia. It's the same. And so we talked a little bit about this, about the idea that so many young Latinx artists are making work that's self-reflective, right? And being often misunderstood in spaces where there is not enough reflection, right? Of things to look and feel like us. And so it becomes another kind of process of a difficult process, right, of having to sort of explain and translate or perform, right, in spaces that can feel alienating. And so, and I think about, I mean, we're both professors, we both teach at art schools, and think about this, I think, with students all the time in the institution we work in and others. It's an ongoing challenge. I mean, and I want to just like continue this a little bit more because it makes me think about like the Whitney, right, in '93, and that the '93 biennial, like, you know, was like the multicultural biennial. It was very controversial. It's like it had its moment, and there was critical acclaim, and then it also was disassociated, you know, by a lot of critics later. And so it's a really interesting moment historically of both exposure and then kind of criticism. And you know, the Whitney, you know, we just had the Puerto Rican show at the Whitney. No existe un mundo puertorriqueño, Puerto Rican art in the wake of Hurricane Maria.
She's here.
Marcela is here. Marcela Guerrero, the curator, is here. Yes, we went for Marcela. And I mentioned that because so my last two exhibitions in New York have been at spaces. No existe at the Whitney, and then right here at the Museum of the City of New York is Moncho, who's the curator there, Moncho Lopez. So two Puerto Rican curators, right, each of those spaces, which is fantastic, right? In historically white institutions, you know, and so there's something exciting that's also happened, but it's not without resistance, and challenges still in both spaces or in all spaces in New York. And so I wonder just like how you think about, you know, these ongoing challenges. You just had a piece that was acquired by MoMA, right, last year. Which is amazing. Badge of Honor is now in MoMA's collection and is on loan for the new museum show. But that piece was in storage for 30 years, right?
25,
25 years.
30.
Before being acquired. So,
Yeah.
so it's like, I think there is, that's also part of the reality, right? Is that museum, I'm thrilled that there that these things are happening, right? But they have not happened without struggle and challenges, right? And they're catching up. Like there's still a lot of catching up to do, I feel.
But I think the museums and art institutions are vulnerable right now. And I feel that, and I sense it, and it's wonderful when I saw this exhibition. I mean, when this exhibition came up, at the new museum, it's because I think that people somehow learned the lesson. The viewer learned the lesson. Let me put it this way: the non-Latinx viewer learned the lesson, and I think that somehow us, as Latinx people, have also learned the lesson. And so when looking at the work, of all this work at the new museum, maybe 25, 30 years later, badge of honor became, which is the father and son incarcerated, became an issue, an institutional issue. And it wasn't so much the father and the son. And that's a big turn. You know, when you see people standing and looking at the work, and then they realize that this is all supported by institutional racism, right? To see that now in 2023 is different from 1993. You know what I mean? When you look at the work, the scene of a crime, you begin to think of feminicidio. Oh my God, what's that word in English?
Femicide.
Femicide, right? I'm almost ready to answer the phone. Got my finger. So you think of femicide, and then you think of institutions, and you think of all these things that when you look at the work in 1993, you were only thinking about the Puerto Rican community. You were only thinking about stereotypes. But this is something that is happening worldwide, right? And so there is a shift. And I think that there is a way in which we're looking at institutions, but we're also putting a little bit of responsibility on the institutions and they're taking the risk to take a little bit of that responsibility in the context that they present. The beautiful thing about the artists in the biennial, in the Whitney Museum's recent exhibition, Post Huracán, was that you look at the work and you're standing there and you're like, oh, the Puerto Rican. It happens to be that. But the visual language, the way in which they connected, the way in which the audience related to it, it was universal in many ways. And I still think that my work is universal as much as I have a very, very specific Puerto Rican language. I think my work is universal because ask Polish, ask Italian, ask everyone else in every country, and they share memories and they share the same landscape of memory that we do. It just so happened that we carry the responsibility at some point, you know, also including African Americans. We carry the responsibility for plastic. We were preserving our most valuable things, and people were laughing at us.
Yeah, and also a lot of people can relate to, I think, the idea of abundance over scarcity, right? And so, and that the idea of exagerado, like as an aesthetic, right, is also sort of like a political action in and of itself.
It is a political action because I come from a family that my parents went through the what's the thing that's called when there's nothing?
Depression?
That's the time, the epoch,
The depression.
The depression.
Yeah.
A scary word. And I come from a family who lived the depression for many, many years. And I remember my mother did not buy one can of beans. She bought like 5 cans of beans. And we're like, everything was like a lot. You go to our weddings, you go to quinceañeras, you go to sweet bean, all that stuff, and they're just like leftover, massive leftover. You know, overly covered, the surfaces are over covered. Because I think that we also wanted to create the illusion that there's more than we have. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not judgmental. That's perfectly fine. So I started to look at that, and I remember, go back again. I'm sorry, Susana, I put you in the spot so much. But I looked at the in the project, and I looked up, And all I see was chandeliers coming down from the project, like what an amazing contradiction at the same time that you think that you expect. And at the same time, you see these families living like their way of living, their way of life, and claiming it and enjoying that. And so my work comes from a lot from that. Why have one when you can have multiple? But also, in my work, when many of you who shop at 99-cent stores, you can't buy one because that thing is gonna break. You got to buy four. Four, because you know that it has a very, very short lifespan on the shelves. So if you buy one, you come back, that's not gonna be there. So buy four.
Yeah, having said that though, it's remarkable how fresh everything looks in these works that were done in the 90s. Like they have been so well preserved, all the plastic fists, the jewels, like all the chucherias that are in the barbershop, like they look like they were just done. There's no dust, no decay. It's like, so it's impressive. And a lot of people that have gone to the museum would have commented on that. But also, like, I wanted to make a point about this because this is not a show you can see quickly. And Pepon's work is built on a process that is a slow process, right? Of thinking, of making, of connecting, of relationship building, etc.
Which is the reason why I don't show them.
Makes total sense. That makes total sense. But by the same standard, so I think to get the most from the work, you have to be a slow viewer, also a patient viewer, and you have to take the time to see and feel what's there because everything that is there is intentional. Every little detail. And if you look at those barber chairs and you look at the basin of each of these things, they're all filled with crazy things, plastic ears and old cell phones. And there are spirits that are listening and seeing and all around, like all of these spaces, right? When you're in scene of the crime, right? When you're standing in front of these two sides, right? Well, and it's whose crime, right? In one side is like a Hollywood set that's a projection of these stereotypes, and all the cameras are facing the covered body on the floor, right? On the other side, which is the family room, the lights are facing the viewer, right? And so there are little things that shift where it's about, it's shifting the lens, literally, right? From the maker, from the Hollywood producers, from the media, from the artists, right, to the viewer. And those moments where you begin to question, like, how much of this is someone else's story and how much of this is mine, right? And how much of this is being projected upon us and how much of this am I projecting onto myself, right? Or feeling. I love that back and forth.
It's circle.
Completely. It's a really powerful part of it. And so in that space of reflection, I love the analogy of slow cooking, right? That it's work that takes time to produce. The relationships and the stories from the father and son of Badge of Honor to the kids that you work with in Reform. And that's a significant part of the work that's not seen. You don't see. It's not at the museum. You see the results of it, and you see the presence of their energy. And sometimes their physical presence, is embodied in the work, right? Like the Bobcats and the young people of Reform. But there's so much that happens behind the scenes, right? Before it gets to that space.
Right. I also I'm with you.
Yeah.
I completely forgot what I was gonna say, but I think that what I was gonna say was that the exhibition, I worked really close with the curators in a way of creating spaces in the museum where you felt somehow that you were witnessing something with someone next to you. And there was a collective kind of witnessing in front of the piece where you implicated. And also other works, that the smaller works, where you feel that you're one-on-one with that. Our abuelos and abuelas are extremely present in that exhibition. Like forget mom or dad. It's just like way back there in your family. Through the collection of knickknacks, through the collection of imagery. The only thing that I intentionally did was the La Mega, that I wanted to put La Mega in the
Stereo.
Yeah,
It's on the little radio.
because that radio station hasn't changed much. And I don't even know why they're on the air. But so I wanted to leave that. I wanted to leave that as opposed to have, as opposed to put a recorded music, recorded station. But the idea was that, the idea is that you go into Badge of Honor, you are in a space that is 10 times bigger than the community where it was originally shown. The idea of the institution, that it was so vivid and so clear with the seats, the benches. With the benches, and then you go into the bar, and obviously, in some of the work, it's extremely private. I know the story behind the scene of a crime. Very, very private space, you're not allowed to come in. You're not allowed to come into Badge of Honor. The relationship between the father and son, extremely private. Although we can connect to it, it's not our scope. We're there to stand and create a triangular relationship with them. You're there, and then you see them, and somehow there's some connection there. And that was purposely done. You go into the barbershop, and it's a place of celebration. Like you go in, and you're like, whoa, we're all part of this. Yeah. And then you go into reform, and it's the same.
But what also happens though, I think, is that in the triangulation, right? Because we can, although it's not our story, it's a very specific story. The father and son of Badge of Honor, for example. Like I saw Pepon's work for the first time in Puerto Rico when you had the exhibition there. It was in the late 90s, maybe.
No, the door to door.
Door to door. So that's when there was
2000.
2000. Okay, so I was in grad school, finishing grad school at that time, and I saw. Badge of Honor and Scene of the Crime were both in Puerto Rico at that time. And the barbershop. And Barberia was in the museum already, right? At that point? No. Okay.
But Barberia came back and they were.
Okay. So
and the house, Tina's house, had traveled from home to home.
Ah, okay. So I didn't see that one.
No, because it was shown in different homes.
Different places. It was itinerant. But I remember Badge of Honor, the storefront kind of space somewhere. I don't remember the institution, but I remember being there by myself, right? And so I mean, like in full disclosure, like I think that's the first piece that ever made me cry, as a young artist. Just watching the dialogue, because it's a heartbreaking dialogue between the father and the son. And so it's not your story, right? It's not my story, but it's a story, and it's a conversation between a father and son who are communicating through video, right? And trying to tell each other how they feel, right? Through these really difficult circumstances. And that it would take that difficult of a circumstance to have that open a conversation, like I was profoundly moved by. And there's so many people that can relate to that, So it's one of those pieces you have to sit with to really see the dialogue, and it's incredibly powerful. It's powerful now as it was then. But you in the new museum, you move from that space into La Barberia, right, where you're not supposed to cry. And so it's and there again, so there's some levity. But it brings you back and forth. The show is so powerful in that way that you can literally bring you from tears to laughter, from one room to the next. And that's such a powerful experience. And I've talked to so many people who have described it that way. And what I love about all of these works individually and collectively is that there's always a pathway towards, like, a healing pathway out, through all of these works. There is a way that we find ourselves and locate ourselves within a space of emotion that can feel like a healing too. And that's huge. That's huge. But you have to be there long enough with the work to feel that full range. And I just don't know many people who I can say that I've not experienced like that with a lot of work. So I'm saying this especially for people who have not seen the work yet, to take your time moving through room to room and give yourself that opportunity.
Thank you, Miguel. The Badge of Honor came from in the 1995. Badge of Honor. I can't remember. 94, 95. I went with the carousel. Remember those carousels that push the button and then the image comes out. And I went in several communities. The way that my process actually is, and I'm teaching that a lot at Tiger, which I transform my creative methodology into a pedagogical philosophy. And what I did is just basically went to lots of people in the community, showing my work, which basically I was justifying that I was an artist, you know, because everybody was like, what are you? Like, I make art. Like, really, you make art? You call that art? I'm like, yeah. But anyway, I did that and I show those slides, and then was showing to a group of kids from a local community in Newark. And somehow, somewhere, the conversation of incarceration came up. And then dead silence. Everybody was dead silent. And I thought, I'm interested in this. And so I asked them, and the kids say, you know, I don't want to talk about it. And so I figured out, I have a whole way of traveling to institutions to get the things that I need to do and get done. And I figured out through the help of one of the board of trustees from the museum to put me in touch with a New Jersey City incarceration system. I visited a prison. I got in touch with a social worker. We went through the whole process, and I said, I think that what I wanted to do is to begin to have a conversation with an inmate who's willing to have somebody else who can have basically, when I make work, I have no clue what I'm doing. I just go with intuition. So I got in touch with a caseworker, and this guy came forward and he said, yeah, I'm willing to work with you. He had AIDS, and he was very, very sick, and I was not able to work with him. And then this older father, and with a carousel, I showed it to the old inmates, and his father came over, which was the father in Badge of Honor. And he came over and said, like, I want to work with you. Like, yeah, you want to work with me? You have a son? He said, yeah, I have a son. He's like, okay, wonderful. And then I went home and I started thinking about it and went back again to the prison. And one day with Irene Sosa, who is was the filmmaker, we went and I said, Irene, I have this technique, don't laugh. I have this technique. I'll ask them to I'll give them one word. And they'll take over. And so I'm sitting there, like they gave me permission to sit in the prison. I had the camera to my right, and I just looked at the father, dead serious, and I said, Abuelo. And that's how the conversation starts. I don't know if everything will be enough, but that's how the conversation starts. The father talked about Abuelo. I recorded about half an hour, which is what we were giving. The guy stays, I leave, I go to the son's house, and I tell the son, your father talked to me about Abuelo, and I wanted to show you. So he had a big TV. I had the TV on my right, the camera on my left. And I said, you can talk to your father when you hear him talking. I had no idea what I was doing. So he talked to the father in response to what the father was saying. The next day I went back and I said, how about we talked about mother? And then that's when they talked about the mother, the absence of the mother, you know, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about dreams. And that's the only word that I used. And they just went on and on. I had like about 45 hours of recording. And some of them, I had to control myself. I knew what was going on, and I really had to compose myself. And I recorded this, and we ended up with an 18-minute conversation between the father and son. Beautiful conversation between the father and son. And then after that, I'm just like, what am I gonna do with this? I have no idea. So then I had to convince the people in the correction facility to lend me their furniture. The father's furniture. And they were like,
From the cell.
from the
Yeah,
cell.
yeah. It's actual correctional facility
Yeah.
cell-like furniture that's in the cell, yeah.
So so they said, I think that at some point people go like, this guy's really, well, Nelly, I said, true or not? Nelly was like, my body's so crazy. Let's do it, you know? And then I walked away with all those images. But I mean, copies of the images, to be honest. But the guy said, sure, just take it. And then I just went in and took the furniture. The father was in the halfway house. And so I took the furniture and I went to the homes, to the kid, and I said, let's go shopping. I have money from a grant, let's go shopping. And then we bought all that stuff.
Wow.
And then I obviously took it to the studio and began to translate his feelings, and I always felt like he's walking on eggshells, so I put mirrors on the floor so that it looked like very fragile life and all the posters. But all my work, it's based on real stories. I don't make things up. I don't make anything up. They're based on real stories. And the videos are basically techniques that I use that I allow the person that is working with me to take over. I just stand there and watch, you know? In Reform, the kid that writes, do I have to die in order for things to change? Jacob. We had a conversation, beautiful conversation about him, about life in general. Brilliant kid, brilliant. It's just like those 10 kids. I don't even know. Well, the young men and women now, I don't even know what they need to go to school. Really bright, really, really bright. And I say, Jacob, you ready? There's a blackboard, from the actual blackboard from the school that we took from the school. He said, yeah, I'm ready. And I said, just go ahead and write it. Write whatever you wanted to write. And then he wrote that one take.
And then he erased, right?
And then he erased it.
yeah.
But I did give him a prompt, and I said at the end, erase it and then look at us and confront us. And so one take. I'm not kidding you. I was like, wow. This guy is brilliant. And so that's how it happened.
That's another space where everything that's in the space is of the school of Fairhill Elementary, the school that was closed, which the story is about, and many stories like this are about in Philadelphia, right? This is Reform here, right? School closures.
And that poem, when we speak, you listen. That poem was written by one of the students. And all of them have never been in front of a camera, like a professional camera with lighting and all that stuff. And all of them, we did one take.
Wow.
One
Wow.
take, I'm not kidding.
Yeah. That's in this multi-channel video installation with the pencils that you'll see there.
And the writing on the walls, we also the writing on the walls. And unfortunately, we were not able to put the names and all that stuff in this exhibition. But this is what I call a collaboration. This is what I call a collaboration.
Yeah.
With them. And they went back. They went to the new museum, many of them, and they were so proud. They talked to the guards like, that's me.
Yeah. It's hard to see in these images, but the wallpaper is oversized lined notebook paper where all the students wrote essays.
Real
Essays reflecting on what the impact of their school closing was on their lives, on their communities, on their families. And you can read those essays. It's written on the walls directly, right? And they were done at Tyler, right?
They were the first one that we did when we showed this in 2015. We have to throw them away because it's Tyvek, the kind of a paper that adheres and then it just destroys.
Yeah.
So we got rid of them. And then this one was done at Tyler, and then it was brought to the new museum with the kid from Philadelphia, and then we brought them and put them up in the museum. That drawing is by a kid. They introduced every single member of the School Reform Commission, which is a commission in they don't call it Board of Ed, they call it school district in Philadelphia, and then they made puppets. And they looked at the system as a puppet. It was amazing. It was really, really an amazing experience. I think that one of the most rewarding pieces that I have made in the sense of like, this makes perfect sense. And the kids were so proud because they grew, they interviewed, they invited, I wasn't around. And I said, go and invite the School Reform to come and see the show. And they went and they did the public hearing and they invited them in a public hearing. They showed up at Tyler. And they all sit together, and the commissioners were crying. And I remember Linoshka said to them, oh, you're crying? You should have seen my mother when you closed the school. Right?
This is the same body that made the decision to close the schools that these kids went to, that they invited to come and see this installation about school closures. So
it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And of course, I just like, if you invite them, bring cookies and settle down, get a couple of napkins, you put the napkins and, and the plates, and they did all that, and they sat with them through the entire process. It was unbelievable.
but also a project that's placed over the course of a few years, right?
Yeah.
Working with the same group, and so, again, back to sort of like this kind of slow building of a project.
5 years.
5 years, wow,
5 years.
5 years.
And so to talk about something that I didn't see the word, but the ethical issues around my work, the group and I had decided what to do in case the word says. That it's, I don't get 100%, we have to figure that out. Among ourselves. And I still in touch with them. I mean, basically they went to the museum and saw the show. So there's a lot of negotiation going on, and I'm always willing to whatever, people say.
Beautiful. We're running out of time here, and so, do we have time for a couple questions? Really? No time at all?
Oh, no.
Well, I thought-
Why?
Yeah, at least a couple questions. I thought it was until 8. Is that until-
I tell you, when they close the door, you open. What, I'll be fair, one quick question. Anyone has an urgent, yes,
Yeah, go together in the 80s.
yes,
I remember you taking me to your house, I made you find me marketing.
okay.
Yeah, and was telling me about your studies in social work. And I believe that influenced much of your work, that you experience in social work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the methodology that I learned from social, I stopped doing social work, I'll be really clear. I'll stop social work because social work didn't work for me. And I don't think that it was also working with the patient, the clients that I was working for. And so I stopped that. But the methodology is what I brought into my work as an artist, and I didn't realize that until much later. I'm like, wow. When I said to you earlier about the door frames, I had in El Barrio, well, not anymore, but I knew what the inside of the houses looked like. Because I visited many of them. And that door frame was amazing. It was a very interesting place and interaction between what happens outside of your home and what happens inside. And that's the place where identity gets stuck. And so I learned a lot of that from, I can go into a house right now, and this is experiencing, and I'll be quick. I can go into a house, and by looking at the house, I know what's going on. That's the development and the experience, obviously, because of the connection to my spirituality and all that combined with that makes sense. Thank you.
Wait, I'm sorry, there was a student, can I give the last question to a student? Is that okay? Was there a hand back there?
Here.
I mean, I can also decide. Hi, good afternoon, evening. My name is Linda Buscarrillo. I am also an artist, teaching artist, and I work a lot with youth in high school. So I'm really impressed with what you did in collaboration with the youth and like to get them to speak about, what they're experiencing and how important education is for them. I guess I'm curious to ask, because you spent 5 years in a press, like how did you, with every session, did you have a different project, or did you have to create a curriculum of some sort in order to develop that project?
No, not at all. One thing led to the other. I asked the students to lead, and I was providing. I also connected with, it was like a Ibarando, I don't know how to say that. It's spread, right?
Yeah.
Feeling connected, stuff like that. The whole process. I never wanted to impose myself, but I tell you that at the very, very end, what I did learn from this, and I said as much as I think it's about the other, it's about myself. And what I did learn at the very, very end, with all my work, also, I learned that it is about me. And in reform, I learned that I received a really bad education. And I didn't know. I assumed that I went to college, and then I did my master's at Columbia University, and I assumed that was amazing. Then I realized just before we're ready to open, and I turn around and I tell them, oh, wait a second. my education, my primary and secondary education in high school was really lousy. Really, really lousy. And what I have learned, primarily is because of my own curiosity. My own curiosity would take me. And obviously the people that take me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.